Yes, I want to welcome you once again to this channel, Birasa Mike Archives. Thank you so much for tuning in. I welcome you so much. I'm Birasa Mike, a teacher of European history, a teacher of history, and a teacher of economics. I want to welcome you so much. And this time round, we are going to continue with our subject matter, which is European history, and that is specifically the French Revolution. The French Revolution started in 1789 in France. Actually, the date is 5th May 1789. That is when this revolution started. This revolution started as a peaceful revolution in France. At first, the French masses never wanted to be violent. They never wanted to overthrow the ruling government. They were peaceful. However, when they realized that the regime which was controlling France by that time, was not willing to give them the reforms, the changes they wanted. They became violent in 1792 to 1794 in what came to be known as the Reign of Terror. However, we are going to look at different causes of the French Revolution that started on 5th May 1789. There is no single factor that can be brought out to be the only cause of this revolution. However, there are various factors that are considered by different historians to be causes of the revolution. So we are going to look at different factors in the French society that contributed towards the outbreak of the French Revolution. The French Revolution, as I told you, was a fundamental change that swept across the social, political, and economic spheres of France. It began on 5th May 1789, when the French masses decided to take up firearms, when the French masses decided to wake up and change or transform their society politically, socially, and economically. By that time, in 1789, the king in France was known as King Louis XVI, who had descended on the throne in 1774, meaning that the king was too young. He was too young. At just the age of 20 years, he was the king in France. So he couldn't solve the problems of the French masses because he lacked experience. So, due to that and other factors, as we shall be seeing, the French Revolution became inevitable. In other words, it became unavoidable in France. So, let's look at various causes of the French Revolution. And the first cause was the nature, take note of this cadence, the nature of the ancient regime, the character of the Bourbon monarchy. That is the same. The ancient regime and the Bourbon monarchy are the same. So when I talk about the ancient regime, this is the regime, this is the monarchy which had controlled the political sphere of France, the social and political spheres of France from time immemorial, for a long period of time. For over 400 years, the French society was under the Bourbon leaders. However, by 1789, the situation in France had worsened under the ancient regime, which forced the French masses to rise up and stage a revolution. These are some of the reasons why the ancient monarchy, the ancient regime, caused a revolution in France. One, under the ancient regime, there was no constitution. There was no constitution in France. The French masses realized that they had no constitution and their rights were not represented in a constitution because it was not there. For a long period of time, the French masses had lived without a constitution. They had nowhere to run to. There were no checks and balances in the powers of the leaders. Because as we all know, it is a constitution to provide checks and balances in the powers of the leaders. But since France had no written constitution by 1789, the French masses realized that they had nothing to do apart from staging a revolution. So one, there was absence of a constitution, which drove France into a melting pot of the French Revolution. Then two, still under the nature of the ancient regime, there was absence of a parliament. For 175 years, there was no parliament in France. That arrangement alone caused the French Revolution because other countries like Britain had an active parliament. But in France, there was no parliament for 175 years. Actually, the Parliament of France had last sat in 1614. That arrangement alone annoyed the French masses since they had nowhere to run and later on to hide. But the only option was to stage a revolution and get reforms that they wanted. In other words, they had nowhere to report their grievances. They had nowhere to report their challenges. They had no representatives because there was no parliament. Just like here in Uganda, we have a parliament. In case we have a problem in certain parts of the country, like in Karamoja, where people don't have iron sheets, where people don't have permanent houses, you will find that cases will be represented in the parliament. But in France, there was no parliament. The king would make decisions together with his wife, and later on they implement what they have made without consulting the concerned personnel. So there was lack of an active parliament, which caused a revolution. Then three, still in the French society, there was what called despotism. When I talk of despotism, I mean the dictatorial nature of the regime. The regime was despotic in nature. The French kings, even before the revolution, before King Louis XVI, we had kings like Louis XIV, Louis the 13th. They were despotic in nature. Corruption was the order of the day in the ancient regime. Like King Louis at one point he said that that something is illegal. The thing is illegal because I wish it. These kings claimed to be having divine powers from God. They were answerable to none apart from God. One king said, the state is myself. That kind of dictatorship, despotism, really forced the French masses to revolt. On top of that, there was imprisonment of people without trial. In the famous Lettre de Cachet, they would just imprison people without trying them in courts of law. That arrangement alone forced the French masses to stage a revolution to create a change in the French society. Then still, under the nature of the ancient regime, there was what we call over-centralization of power. Over-centralization of power in the monarchy also caused a revolution. Power was in the hands of the king. Any decision to be made, the king had to be consulted. You see? The king had to be consulted in case of any decision that is to be made. That delayed decision-making in France. So reforms were not made in France because the decisions had to be made by the king. So the over-centralization of power also caused challenges in the French society, in the economic sphere of France, in the political sphere of France, and in the social life of France. Everything had to be made by the king, which delayed decision-making, hence causing a revolution in 1789. Then next, still under the ancient regime, there was what we call miseries in the army. The French army was in a bad condition. It's still under the nature of the ancient regime. The French army was in a poor condition, a poor state. The monarchy involved the French army in two various useless wars, like the American War of Independence, like the war between France and Britain, and other wars. These wars weakened the army. The army was poorly fed, poorly trained, and poorly equipped. No wonder by 1789, most of the army officers in the French army had to sympathize with the French revolutionary masses. So that alone caused the French Revolution. So that is how the nature of the ancient regime, the character of the ancient regime, that is the Bourbon monarchy, caused the French Revolution. I told you that the monarchy lacked a constitution. The monarchy lacked a parliament for 175 years. The monarchy was full of despotism. It was despotic in nature. Nepotism was the order of the day. Dictatorship was the song of the day. Corruption and embezzlement of funds were all part of the monarchy. Then too, as I also wind up this challenge, I also told you that the nature of the ancient regime was also comprising of miseries in the army. which forced the French masses to stage a revolution in 1789 on 5th May of that very year. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll be back, and when I come back, we shall talk about other causes of the French Revolution. Other causes of the French Revolution, most especially King Louis XVI, who was the leader in France by that time. Thank you so much for tuning in. We meet again next time.